You're listening to certified financial planner Doug Goldstein, host of the Goldstein on Gelt Show, www.goldsteinongelt.com.
Okay, I'm very excited to be talking to Monte Silver, who is a lawyer in Israel and in the United States. He's licensed in both countries. He specifically represents people on cross-border matters and specifically even more on U.S. taxation issues. And Monte, I'll tell you what's interesting about that is that, like you, I'm also a cross-border expert. I deal on the investment side, but I only deal in U.S. investments, even though I'm also licensed in Israel. So tell me what the big picture is before we dive down. There are either two types of people listening to us today: Americans living in Israel who have U.S. investments, or non-Americans living outside the United States who have U.S. investments. What should these people be worried about?
Well, I represent people that have American tax issues. Those can be either American people living in Israel or abroad, either in America or elsewhere, or it can be people who are not American, like Israelis living in Israel, but all have U.S. tax matters.
Could you describe what the issues are that people who live outside the United States need to think about when they have investments inside the United States?
Well, the world is broken down to two when it comes to U.S. tax law. You have the tax world for Americans, and you have the tax world for people who are not Americans. The tax world for non-Americans is pretty complex and important for people who are investing in America. And I see a lot of those kind of people. I'm sure you know quite a few, Doug. Also, people that invest, non-American people, Israelis, we'll call them Israelis, but it could be British or French, who invest in U.S. real estate and who invest in stocks and bonds of a U.S. company. So the main issue is estate tax, as you of course know, and that means that any non-American person who invests in an LLC, if it's real estate, or invests in stocks and bonds as an individual, is subject to estate tax, and they're taxed at 20 to 30 up to 40% on the value of their investments if they pass away owning those investments. So a big part of what I do is assist non-Americans, Israelis, who have significant investments in stocks and bonds and real estate in the United States.
So let's just clarify that. I just want to be clear. So you're saying that a non-American, let's say an Israeli or Brit or French, who has real estate or stocks or a portfolio in the United States is potentially subject to estate tax, which means that if he dies, everything above $60,000 is
Right.
subject to U.S. estate tax, but there are things that he can do to avoid that tax that are legal. I just want to be very clear. This is a legal show, and
Yes,
we're only
of
talking
course.
about ways of doing it that it's not hiding the money.
Yes, there are things you can do, and that it's sort of like a tree of logic here. The question is whether you're talking about stocks and bonds or you're talking about real estate. And if it's real estate or stocks and bonds, whether you own them already or whether you're about to purchase them. So we'll talk about real estate because I think a vast majority of the people that I encounter own real estate and they already own it. And the problem with real estate, as opposed to securities, is you just can't buy and sell and buy and sell. It's complicated. Stocks are easily sold. So what does an Israeli or a French or a Brit do who owns real estate and wants to avoid real estate, the estate tax? They're not going to sell it just to avoid estate tax. They may be young. They may think they're not going to pass away tomorrow. So that is one area of solutions that are and problems that have to be addressed. Then an easier solution, of course, is if they haven't bought it already and trying to optimize the solution prospectively before they buy the real estate. And it's always much easier to address these issues of estate tax before you purchase. That's with real estate. With stocks and bonds, there's any stock or bond of Google, IBM, or Spider that's traded in America is also subject to what you described, Doug, estate tax above $60,000. Here, I encounter people who are a bit older and want to transfer things to their children. And there's a variety of ways that person can avoid U.S. tax on the estate tax legally when they already own the stock, or if they want to sell them and then repurchase them, that's another option. One other wrinkle.
Could you just clarify? I just want to clarify something on this. You said both stocks and bonds. Doesn't the IRS look at these differently for a non-U.S. resident?
No, they're both treated the same, and that's a very common mistake. Stocks and bonds and spiders of stocks and bonds, which are traded in America, are treated the same. It's good that you point that out, Doug. Bonds of an American company are treated just like stocks.
And treasury bonds?
Treasury bonds, the same. The only exemption is bonds where the interest is not taxable, like muni bonds. So a muni bond would be an exception to the rule. Treasury bonds are not exceptions. That is a common mistake. Another little wrinkle is cash. Cash or money, I should say, that you hold in a bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, as a non-American, is subject to the estate tax, subject to the $60,000 rule. But money that's held in a brokerage account like Morgan Stanley is not exempt and is subject to the estate tax. So to clarify, money held in Bank of America, not subject to estate tax. Money held in Morgan Stanley or Fidelity, yes, subject to estate tax. So this is an example of the very intricate issues and very fact-specific issues that one has to address when providing consulting services to a person. Just two quick other wrinkles. Of course, Oleh Hadash, or a Toshav Chozer Vatik, a veteran Israeli who returns to Israel, or an Oleh Hadash. Variety of different treatments and different solutions. And then, of course, if an American person is married to an Israeli who's a non-American person, then there's a whole slew of other considerations and planning alternatives that one has to take into account.
Okay, I want to comment one thing you mentioned about the difference of holding cash in a bank and in a brokerage account, which is true because a brokerage account, when people hold cash, it's normally held in the form of a money market fund, which is in fact a mutual fund. It's a type of mutual fund. There are, and for many non-Americans, the brokerage firms who are familiar with this issue will set up an offshore mutual fund, which will protect you from the estate tax because they're aware of this problem. And it's certainly something that people who are non-U.S. citizens but have U.S. assets or U.S. brokerage accounts should know to ask about, because if they just went to some regular broker in the States, he might not actually be aware of this issue at all and could end up causing a lot of problem either to you or to your heirs one day.
Very true, and I'll give you sort of a more local scenario. I publish quite a bit in Globes and other Israeli magazines, and I published an article on the fact that one of the banks was sending out letters to an Israeli bank was sending out Israeli letters to their Israeli customers saying, if you own stocks and bonds, we're going to freeze your money upon your passing until you prove that you paid your estate tax. So a very large investment bank in Israel, maybe the second largest, calls me up and they ask me to come over. And they say, wait, are you telling me that money markets and bonds are subject to estate tax? And these people are investing hundreds of millions of dollars of client money, and they don't even know. So it's not a good idea necessarily to rely on a third party to assume that they're knowledgeable of what they're doing regarding to your tax liability. One should not assume that.
Right. Never make assumptions when dealing with tax, and you should always go to experts. Monte, you are really an expert, and you've given us a lot of great information today. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but tell me in the last few seconds, how can people find you and learn more about the work you're doing?
A variety of ways. The easiest way is to Google Monte Silver, and you'll come across the Israeli law firm that I work at, Eitan Mehulal Sadot. It's a reputable law firm that's been around for several decades. Or in LinkedIn, you can find me there. It's just one search away on Google.
Okay, we will put links to that at the show notes of today's show. at goldsteinongelt.com. Monte Silver, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.